What's up, everybody? Today, my very special guest is joining me. We got a UFC legend, former light heavyweight champion and heavyweight champion. Please give it up for Randy, the Natural Couture. That's right, you heard it from me, guys. Randy is joining me. He's going to be sharing some cool stories from his career and the UFC and his acting career and his insight on the spectrum. So take it away, Randy. I love to hear some cool stories you'd like to share.
I don't know. Obviously, I started fighting in '97. Me and Danny Henderson, and that's how I ended up meeting you, was through Danny. But Danny and I started fighting at the same time. We were both on the national team. I was an alternate on several occasions. This all started wrestling, and fighting just kind of became an extension of wrestling. Yeah, '97 UFC 13. Back then, it was still a tournament format. Fought twice that night. First fight was against Tony Hollema, who had never seen or heard of. Never even seen footage of him fighting, 300-pound Finn. And then my second fight that night was against a guy named Stephen Graham, former football player. He was another great big guy, 290 pounds. So I wasn't quite sure what I'd gotten myself into signing up for mixed martial arts. I took that fight on 3 weeks' notice. I was in shape. I was getting ready to go to Puerto Rico and wrestle in the Pan Am Championships representing the United States. And then on my way back through Atlanta, I got out, went up to Augusta, Georgia, and I had my first UFC experience with UFC 13. It was April or May of 1997, I believe.
Your career is so legendary. There are so many fights that I can pick and choose from. But the one that will always stand out to me is your fight against Nogueira. That is honestly among my top 5 favorite heavyweight fights of all time. The both of you just went toe to toe, refusing to go down, and it went the distance. Share some cool stories about that fight.
That was a fun one. Obviously, I was in Portland, Oregon, which was my hometown, and first gym was Team Quest with Danny and Matt Lemlin and Dan Henderson. We opened up Team Quest with Robert Follis in Gresham, Oregon. So it was fun for me to have the opportunity to fight in front of my hometown fans. Obviously, the fight didn't go my way, but I was proud of that fight. I did everything I trained to do. I got out of a lot of trouble and managed to stay in the fight. I think a lot of guys would have been finished a couple times in that fight, but it was a fun one. I was sure beat up after that one.
Nogueira is a legend. He's fought a list of who's who in MMA, and yeah, ever since you hung up your gloves, you've gone on to star in some big films, case in point, The Expendables. I love to hear some cool stories about your career in the entertainment industry.
Back in the early 2000s, I got the call from the UFC, like, hey, these guys want some authentic cage fighters for this film called Cradle to the Grave. Me, Chuck, and Tito all agreed to play in a fight scene in that movie. It was an underground cage fighting scene, and it was an interesting process. It took 7 days to shoot that 1 5-minute scene in that movie, working with Jet Li and DMX and a little fight scene. Kind of my first exposure to being on a set and what the process was all about. Immediately intrigued by it. It was an interesting experience. I went out and took some acting classes for a little while, which was interesting, and then eventually got an agent and started getting better acting jobs. But fighting always came first. I had to turn down some movie offers and TV offers here and there because I had fights coming up. I managed to squeeze in a few pretty good ones in between fights and stay fairly busy. I retired from fighting, obviously, in 2011, and now I can pursue movies and acting full time with all my energy, and that's what takes precedence now. Is acting gigs, where it used to be fights. So.
Anyway, in the time that we got, please tell me some insights you have about the spectrum.
It's an interesting thing. I think we're seeing an uptick in people on the spectrum these days, and they can't really figure out what they're attributing that to. There's a lot of theories, but nobody really seems to know what seems to be causing this uptick in autism. But at the end of the day, some people think it's a higher level of our evolution as humans, which is entirely possible because most of the folks that I've met that are dealing with autism in many ways function at a very high level and certainly have their the things that they're really good at. For some reason, they seem to excel at more so than the average person walking around, which is an interesting thing.
Thanks again, Randy, for taking your time to do this with me, and I wish you all the best of luck in your future.
Appreciate meeting you, Kenny. Thanks for reaching out, and happy to do the interview. And hopefully, all the folks out there like everything we're talking about. It's all good.